Miracles. They do happen, and sometimes from the companies you least expect them by. Yet here we are in 2023, and this forgotten PlayStation 2 launch game just got a sequel on the PlayStation 5 23 years later. Completely unexpected and very welcomed in my PlayStation library. It all started after the success of the original PlayStation. Sony would release the PlayStation 2 in North America in October 2000. On its launch day, the PlayStation 2 had a total of 29 games in its launch lineup. Everything from your typical sports games like football and hockey, to surprise hits like the original SSX and everything in between. This was a new generation to get excited for, but out of the whole list, Sony themselves only had one first-party game in the whole lineup, Fantavision. The reason behind this? Sony didn't want to compete with the many third-party titles launching with the console. Considering the massive number of games released and the high demand for the console, it was probably a smart move. Fantavision was developed by Japan Studio. It was made during the transitional period from the original PlayStation to the new hardware of the PlayStation 2. In about 6 months, a team of 3 to 5 people developed Fantavision, being ridiculed within the company for developing a small-scale puzzle game despite the newer and bigger hardware available. Directed by Koichi Kanetaka on his very first game project, he had the concept of Fantavision on his mind since 1995. In his youth, he would see fireworks shows at Lake Biwa, the largest freshwater lake in Japan. These memories would inspire him to make Fantavision. Though lacking programming experience, Kanetaka was able to prototype the game through trial and error. Impossible for Fantavision to ever be on the original PlayStation, the project was then pitched for the then upcoming PlayStation 2 for its ability to showcase particle effects due to the PS2's emotion engine. Really, you could say that Fantavision was an early technical showcase for the PlayStation 2's capabilities. Fantavision was also one of Shuhei Yoshida's final projects he supervised at Japan Studio before leaving Japan to become Vice President of Product Development for Sony in North America. When it comes to Fantavision, it's one of those games people either love or they hate. It's a simple game, one anyone can pick up. It's all about color matching and chaining together various flares for big combos and the ultimate firework detonation. There are 2 difficulties, normal and hard, which will add some real challenge the further you go. Across 8 levels, you'll be transported from a city to space, the moon, and beyond. This is where the visuals, the colors, and the music all come together for one spectacular package. And the game splices in these weird, unusual scenes of children and their families playing the game with a retro aesthetic. It's very different. Although lacking in its Japanese release, Western audiences would be treated to a bonus multiplayer mode where 2 players battle out for domination of the screen. Between the 2 difficulties, the 8 levels, and a multiplayer mode along with a chain attack mode, there is little to do depending on how much you're wanting out of the game. While Fantavision isn't much today, I can only imagine how incredible it must have been to see that game on launch day in 2000. 2 years later, in 2002, the game would receive a Japanese exclusive pseudo-sequel of sorts called Futari no Fantavision. Basically a re-release of the original game. The main component of this version was the new multiplayer mode with a remixed soundtrack. Similar to what you would have found in Fantavision's Western releases, this multiplayer mode had players competing against various AI opponents for screen domination. And it really sucks that this version of the game was never released outside Japan because it looks like it has a bit more appeal and more of a focus than the original. But let's be honest, the game's North American cover art did not do the game justice. It looks plain and boring, the logo feels expressionless, and while the main artwork does a decent job at highlighting the different colored flares in the game, there's no spark to this cover. It doesn't grab your attention as it should. It's lacking its own unique identity. The European cover art looks better, but the Japanese cover is the best. Fantavision isn't the only PlayStation exclusive to get a horrible cover. Sony had a habit of doing this, dumbing down the covers of their exclusives for the North American audience like Ico. If you see these covers in the store without knowing about the game, you probably put it back on the shelf. That's not good for business, and it's an injustice for the game itself. And just like Fantavision's cover art, the music varied between regions as well. Japan's was composed by Soichi Terada, North America was composed by Aisha Fakik, and for PAL regions, Jim Croft was the composer. Sony was afraid that the original Japanese score may come across as too weird for European consumers, and this was likely the case for the North American audience as well, once again altering Fantavision's original identity. Later in 2003 and 2008, 2 of Japan's mobile phone services would receive an exclusive mobile phone remake of Fantavision, and I found it near impossible to try to find anything about this game. Video footage, pictures, I was lucky enough to find the few pictures you see on screen. It would have been really interesting to see gameplay of this mobile version in action. and Fantavision would later get re-released in 2015 as a PS2 on PS4 game with trophy support. While not really revolutionary to look at these days, it's still an interesting puzzle game that has its challenging difficulty, especially when it comes to the trophies. It's a great way to easily play the game if you don't have the original hardware. And now here we are over 20 years later, 23 years exact. It's 2023, the PlayStation VR2 is available for everyone, but before that happened, a sequel to Fantavision, Fantavision 22X, would be announced alongside a bunch of Japanese games for the new hardware, coming in at a complete surprise. But just because it's a launch title for the PlayStation VR2 doesn't mean you need to own this extra and expensive add-on to play. Anyone can play Fantavision 22X as long as you have a PlayStation 5. Whereas the original Fantavision was developed in-house by Japan Studio and published by Sony themselves, Fantavision 22X is developed by Cosmo Macchia and is also published by them, seemingly appearing that the IP has been licensed to them by Sony. This also says plenty on Sony's direction for the games, with a continued focus on first-party AAA bangers and not on the smaller titles that they originally did. Though if this is an option and Sony is open to licensing their games, there is big opportunity for more forgotten gems to make a return like Fantavision. Fantavision 22X honors the original and doesn't try to stray too far from its concept. You won't find new gameplay additions outside of the PSVR2 mode, but the sequel does fix whatever flaws the original had and allows for a smoother transition between linking flares against gorgeous backdrops made in Unreal Engine. Fireworks burst in the air above bustling cities, reflecting on the ocean water. Reflective mirrors on satellites in space display bright bursts of colors as astronauts float by. Each level is distinct as Fantavision once again takes you on a colorful journey to the unknown, similar to the original format but different by the time you reach space. Even the odd, almost out-of-place scenes of real people doing random things return against some poorly filmed green screen, but it's good to see Fantavision's identity remain without being altered for each region. Fantavision's original Japanese composer, Soichi Terada, also returns for the sequel and is the only composer you will find for the game. He takes his original score and presents it in a new way, so if you played or heard the original score, it will sound very familiar. Like the original, there are 2 difficulties and 8 levels. Fun enough on its own, but severely missing some kind of multiplayer and extra challenges from the original, or even something new. For $30 US, Fantavision 22X is in need of more content for the amount it's asking for. Sadly, Fantavision 22X never received any promotion outside Japan other than the initial announcement. While the game was never going to be as big as something like Horizon Call of the Mountain, for the excitement shown on Fantavision's big return, a piece of PlayStation history itself, it was quickly forgotten. If you own a PlayStation 5, I highly recommend purchasing Fantavision 22X. But before we wrap up this video, let's briefly talk about some similar games in case you're wanting some more firework fun. Fantavision didn't exactly cause a boom in firework video games, but there were a number of games revolving around the concept, like the DSiWare game Disney Fireworks, and even Sony's own Fireworks AR game for the PlayStation Vita. But there are 2 games people tend to talk about most. The first is Big Bang Mini for the Nintendo DS. Featuring over 100 levels, players use the stylus to shoot fireworks from the bottom screen at enemies on the top screen, while also dodging any debris that falls back to the bottom. Though, if you want an experience that's almost similar to Fantavision, there's 2007's Boom Boom Rocket. Developed by Bizarre Creations and published by EA, Boom Boom Rocket is exclusive to the Xbox 360, but is backwards compatible with the Xbox One on up. Unlike Fantavision, where it's all about chaining together flares, Boom Boom Rocket is a rhythm game like Guitar Hero or Rock Band, with its soundtrack composed of remixed versions of classical music. Boom Boom Rocket feels like it took some inspiration from Fantavision, especially with the fireworks display over a city backdrop, but Boom Boom Rocket is truly original. If you love rhythm-based games, especially ones that have a significant challenge the higher you go up in difficulty, then Boom Boom Rocket is for you. From a forgotten PlayStation 2 launch title to a brand new PlayStation VR2 launch title sequel, Fantavision 22X is probably one of the biggest surprises I've seen on PlayStation. It's been over 20 years. There was never a demand for a sequel, but that's what I love. It's a complete and unexpected surprise. Sony, I need to see more surprises like this. And while the sequel went completely under the radar, those who have played it seem to enjoy it. But let me know your thoughts on the original Fantavision and its new sequel, Fantavision 22X, in the comments below. Have you played either game? Please be sure to like and subscribe for future content. And if you want to reminisce about the original developers of Fantavision, then check out this video on remembering Japan's studio. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.